Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Hi, and welcome to Common Ground. I'm your host, Ashley Hall. On this week's episode of Common Ground, Sue Leagjeld shows us the keys to raising and training show-quality ponies. Also, we get a lesson in woodworking from Duane Tollefson as he crafts handmade coffins.
We're harnessing one of our Shetland ponies. We have 6 Shetland ponies, and they all average about the same height, 43, 44 inches at the wither, the highest part of the shoulder. And this one's name is Chocolate Bunny, and she is a very good driving mare. And every piece of harness on a driving pony has a definite purpose. There's no extra frills that you might see. Everything is definite. So this part is called the saddle, and this is kind of the main part of the harness. And this is a strap that goes underneath. Then now I'm putting on the trace. You think a pony pulls a cart, and we say, well, she pulls really good or whatever, but she's really pushing into this harness. And this is the main part right here. Her shoulder pushes into this. This goes through and fastens to the cart. So all the cart is pushed by this. It's called traces, or just a trace. Now I'm going to put the bridle on, and I take the halter off, but not completely. I put it around her neck, so she knows she can't go anywhere until I get ready. This is a driving bridle. It's not used for riding. It has many important parts to it. One ear goes in, and then the other. And they don't mind when you bend their ear to get it in the harness. Maybe it feels good if they've had bug bites. I started out as a kid, my dad's resort, and we had a brown and white pony, very small, and his fastest speed was a slow walk. And we gave rides to kids. And of course, I got used to the pony and thought, this is what I want to do. Right now I'm ready to bring the cart up. Our son Tim is going to come. He's been in the background here. He also helps me with the ponies. This is a wood wheel cart. And it has iron wheels on the outside of the rims, so it's very noisy on the blacktop. All these things that I'm hooking up are very important. Yeah. This is called a check, and it goes all the way down to the bit, and it keeps her from eating grass when she's not supposed to, and it also gets her up to the right headset. We don't like to have them so they put their heads down real low. If you show in driving, you always have to carry a whip, but I carry one all the time because it's nice to get flies off the back of the pony. And if I have a pony that's a little bit slow and I want him to move a little, I just kind of tap him on the rear, just gently, and they know what that means. What we do when we're going to train a pony to be a well-trained harness pony like this, we hook them up with all the harness except the traces, and we just walk behind and drive them. We walk and the pony walks. And then they get the idea, and we do that at least 20 times because they have to understand the commands. And ours all understand whoa, which means stop. And if I want them to walk, I say walk. And if I want them to trot, I say trot. And they know what that means. So they kind of understand English. You ready? Okay, walk. When you're driving a pony, it's not like driving a horse. You don't leave the lines loose. You always have to have contact with your lines with the bit of the horse. She understands my commands, but she also understands what the lines mean. I'm going to go just down the road a little bit. Trot, Bunny, trot. We're just walking along here. The pony's doing a good job. Nice flat walk, almost all the time. And we're going up here to turn around, and we're going to go a long turn into the ditch, and we'll head back toward the barn. As you can tell, this mare has lots of spirit, but very controllable. And that's the kind of pony I like. When you're going to show a pony, you have to make sure that you have trained that pony enough so that it'll do a really good job for you in the show ring. She has to be very obedient and do exactly what the judges want you to do. And that's up to the driver. And I would recommend that anybody who's going to train a horse or pony to drive, and they've never done it before, they should be sure and take lessons from somebody who knows how. I have given lots of driving lessons to people, and I enjoyed doing it because I don't want them to get out there driving, end up in the ditch, or having a bad accident. I hitch up one of my very gentle ponies, and we go out and I teach them about handling the lines, teach them everything that they could possibly know, and how to harness. And it takes about 2, maybe 3 good times, Bunny, for them to learn why the straps are done the way they are and so on. We always said at the resort, if we had a pony they were going to ride, you couldn't be over 90 pounds because on their back, you know, they can only hold so much weight. They're not like a huge horse. But pulling a cart, they can pull lots of weight in a cart. I started driving at about age 6, and I've had a lot of driving horses and ponies, and I've also ridden a lot of horses. But I think my passion is driving a pony. Ho, Bunny, ho.
Hi, I'm Duane Tollefson. I've made my living in the construction industry since 1977 and as a carpenter and went back to tech school and learned the trade and sometime in '94 I was working on a daycare center in Cass Lake and my uncle died. And my cousins called me up and asked me if I'd design his casket. And that had never entered my mind to design a casket or to even build a casket. And So I called the local funeral home and I said, what's the law? Because I had no idea. I figured you die, you go to the funeral home. And he said, well, there's no law, but some cemeteries require a vault, and to fit in a vault, it has to be less than 30 inches wide and less than 6'6" long. A strong bottom, strong handles, and some kind of a lid. And outside of that, it's your funeral, and we're here to provide the service. A couple days later, in October, I got a letter from Mrs. Severson. And it reads as follows. I just wanted to let you know we were very pleased, and she's underlined very pleased, with the casket we purchased for you. I have had several people ask about it and seem interested in using that kind of a casket. I guess the problem we have is having a suitable place to store them. I myself will definitely want one, and I'm wondering if I purchase one, would you be able to store it? I want to be buried within 24 to 48 hours as my husband was, and I know that's not very much time to construct one. I'm 69 years old and in fairly good health, but life is uncertain, and I do not want this to be a burden for my family. I would appreciate hearing from you. Yours very truly. So I got a hold of her, and she ordered a coffin, and of course I said I can store it, and I did. But then I got a letter from her in November. Now she paid $450 for the coffin. This letter came November 6th of 2000. It says, "Dear Sir, my husband, whom you made the coffin for, was a veteran. The VA have a policy in which they will pay $450 for burial expenses for each veteran. I submitted the receipt which you provided, but they would not accept that because they said it was paid for by Mark and Betty Severson because I was down in Minneapolis at the hospital with Edvin. I asked Mark and Betty to do this for me, so they ordered, picked up, and paid for it initially. It was my expense. The VA suggested I ask for a new receipt using my name instead of Mark and Betty. They also needed the name of the person for whom it was provided on the receipt. That would be Edvin R. Severson. I do not remember the exact date of the original receipt, but Edvin passed away on the 26th of July. I would also appreciate getting your phone number." So by November, I have her coffin in storage. And I sent her a receipt, so I just met her this summer. Sweetest woman that you could want. And and I'm going to tell you her story of her coffin, because I built her coffin in 2000. Now, she told me when I met her recently that they didn't use a funeral home. When Edvin died, they put him in the coffin, put him in the ground, and they took him to the burial site in his old Dodge pickup. Well, I had Mrs. Severson's coffin in storage, and time passed, and in December of 2004, a fellow from Bagley died, and his wife called me and said, "I need a coffin tomorrow." Well, I didn't have time to build a coffin tomorrow, but I had Mrs. Severson's in storage, and Mrs. Severson is in relatively good health. This fellow is not. So I said, I can build it, I can rebuild it. So I sold Mrs. Severson's coffin to this fellow and this family, and between December of 2004 and January of 2005, I got it rebuilt. Mrs. Severson's number 2 was back in storage. January 29th of 2005, I had a heart attack. So I spent most of 2005 on my deathbed. March of 2005, my sister's father-in-law died, and they wanted a pine box. And I didn't have time to build one. I could come out here and spend 15 minutes and have to go lay down. But I had Mrs. Severson's coffin in storage, and I was broke. Mrs. Severson is in relatively good health. This fella needs a coffin, and I need some money. I figured I can build it, I can do it. So I sold Mrs. Severson number 2 to my sister's father-in-law family, and it took me 6 months to get Mrs. Severson's coffin number 3 rebuilt. But I got it rebuilt and put in storage. Then in January of 2006, I get a call from the son of the fellow that's in Mrs. Severson number 1. He said, "We need a coffin for Mom." I said, "What's wrong with Mom?" He said, "Well, they've given her 6 months to live." And I said, "What could ail your mother that they would give her an expiration date?" And he said, "She's diabetic with a heart condition." I said, "Do you mean that's fatal?" Well, it seems like it. Well, so I had 6 months to build her coffin. Well, in the middle of this 6-month period, now over the years, I don't build them all, but I built a few. And I built a coffin for a fella whose wife was still alive, and she had heard that it was illegal for me to build coffins. So she never ordered one. Well, she died, and the family needed a coffin. In that one picture I showed you where there's the coffins lined up on the bench, and I have Mrs. Severson number 3. Well, she died, they need a coffin, and Mrs. Severson is in relatively good health. So I sold Mrs. Severson number 3 to this other family. And I effectually and fervently pray for Mrs. Severson's continued good health. So I tell people, if you want to live forever, I'll store your coffin and I'll pray for you and keep you in good health. In the process of time, I sold her third coffin, or her coffin for the third time. I finally got it rebuilt and in storage. And February of this year, February of 2011, a family from Clearbrook, they lost their man, and the family came, and that was the only coffin I had. And they needed it right away, and I told them the story of Mrs. Severson's coffin and how I pray for her continued good health, and that I've sold this coffin 4 times, or 3 times, 3 times. And they decided they wanted it. And Mrs. Severson is in relatively good health. Now, even though it's been 10 years, I'm going to assume, and I had never talked to her, except for our correspondence back in 2000. And I've also prayed that she has a good sense of humor. So I sold Mrs. Severson number 4 to this family, and here's the letter I got from them. This is a thank you note they sent to me, and it says, Duane, we would like to thank you for selling us the Mrs. Severson model coffin for Charlie. We were very satisfied with it, thank you. So we're calling Mrs. Severson's coffin our best-selling model. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting her this summer, and she has a wonderful sense of humor. She just cackled when I told her the story. I called her up and asked her if I could share this on this program. She said, oh, yes, absolutely. And she said, what are you going to do when I die? I said, we're going to have to discontinue your model. Unless I hire help to come in, well, and I sell them for $5.50, and I don't make a lot of money at that. But, and like I said, I don't make a living at this. It's what they did 100 years ago. The local carpenters and cabinet builders built the coffins. People would storm in the barn or in the attic. The first This Old House episode that I ever watched was a 3-story mansion in Massachusetts, and at the top of every stairway there was this little alcove, and they said that was to get the coffins out of the attic, because they used to store the coffins in the attic, and so that's where.
So are you, in a sense, would you say you're kind of preserving history?
I'm trying to create a renaissance, and let's redo this. Let's rethink what they used to do, and like we spoke earlier, funerals cost a lot of money because people pay it. They don't have to if you think ahead, if you plan ahead, and this is one small way to make it, and it doesn't have to be. One issue with wooden coffins is they stay in the ground. In '94, when the Mississippi River flooded, they had all these caskets coming up, and it was the vaults that were popping up. Just because their concrete doesn't hold them in the ground. We've got boulders that have been coming up for centuries, and frost pushes them up. This stays in the ground. You put it in the ground, it stays there. But what I would hope is that and there are getting to be more and more people that have bought them and stored them. A couple of things that are really cool, that really make it personal, is that there was a fellow from Solway who died in, his wife called me about the 3rd week in May, and hospice was taking care of him, and she picked up the coffin on the 20th of May. He died the 21st. He wasn't embalmed. They had him at the funeral. They took him to the cemetery on a buckboard with a team of his horses. That's a homemade thing. I mean, another family, the fellow was in a nursing home, and they bought the coffin, and he was a mechanic all his life, and they took him from the funeral on the back of his '29 Chevy that he had restored, and they drove past his house for one last trip and took him to the cemetery. And that just it makes it personal. It's so real. And, that's where I would like to get. I'd like to see people take a more personal approach, because death is an important part of life. And like we said, everybody dies. I don't know anybody that was alive in the 1800s, and that's only 100 years, or 110. So that would be my conclusion, is that and it doesn't have to be my coffins. It can be, like for instance, there was a fellow that just passed away Saturday. He was in his late 80s. He had a tree that blew down in his yard, and he had a local carpenter build his casket. And he had it in storage, and he's in it now. The funeral's tomorrow. So, I'm not the only one that does this. There's, and like I said, 100 years ago, that was part of the carpenter's job, was to build coffins. And it wasn't uncommon. And then, of course, the industry took over, and it became industrial and impersonal, whereas this is personal. in getting to know the people, you're meeting them in general at the most vulnerable time in their life. They're at the lowest that they can be, as far as when you're trying to deal with getting your head around someone losing a loved one is a process. Grief is a process, and so that most of the people that are in the coffins or that I've sold to are people that I know. There's getting to be more and more people that I don't. But it also, you get in touch with them at a very low point in their life, and maybe you can help them out a little bit. Maybe you can lift them up. And some of the thank you cards I've gotten, they confirm that. I mean, this is exactly what we wanted. You meet people at a very hard time in their life. Now, I guess to summarize, this is a process that I had never considered, but got into it, and in getting into it, I get educated of the process of how industrial it has become, the whole process of death. This opens up an alternative that has always existed, but now, maybe we're a little closer to where we need to be as a society, in taking personal attention to our living and our dead.
I'm Duane Tollefson, American craftsman, and usually I'm doing woodworking, but in the springtime, when the sun starts to shine and it warms up a little bit, we're going to tap some maple trees and we're going to make some syrup. And it is that time of the year, and so we're going for it. And this is how I drill holes these days. It used to be a hand brace and bit, but when they came along with cordless drills, it sure improved the process and made it a lot easier. So I'm just drilling a hole in a maple tree. Just like that. And then we put a spout in it. Okay, here's the modern tap. It's a little cast tap. This is what I'm going to put into the tree to be able to collect my sap. And I've already drilled the hole. As you can see, it's running pretty good. Okay, it's got a tapered end on it, so it snugs into the tree real nice. Takes just a couple minutes for that to fill up. And there we go. She's a dripping. And then I'm hanging my container on there, so I'm going to collect it. And here's Duane's high-tech method of collecting his sap. Looks like a milk jug to me. And a little piece of wire on it. And I cut a little bit of a relief out of the top because it pours out a lot faster that way. The next phase will be when they get full, I'll have to cruise around the woods and collect all my sap. And I have a big cooler on the back of the four-wheeler, which we're going to show you. And so what I do, I got the cooler, got a bucket, have my containers hanging on the tree. And I just pour into the cooler. Just, there's a lot of manual labor, but kind of one of them self-sufficient things that's kind of fun to do until you've done about 5 or 6 batches, and then you hope it quits running because you're tired of doing it. Here I've got a stainless tank, probably holds around 80 gallons. Here's Duane's new evaporator system for making syrup. A dual pan. Back in the back's where I do my main cooking, and then I've plumbed it so I can have the fluid come from the back pan to the front, and then it runs around these baffles. Then I can draw it off over here in batches. Since when you're making syrup, You have to boil off about 30 to 40 gallons of water to get 1 gallon of syrup. So basically you're getting rid of a lot of water, driving off a lot of steam. Takes a lot of wood, and it gets hot next to the stove. If you don't pay attention to what you're doing and your fluid runs too low and it turns to foam, then you're not making syrup, you're making candy. And rescued a disaster like that last week, and we ended up making some maple fudge. At least it was usable. We got a good boil going on and we're making steam. Hopefully we'll be making some syrup too. And here's some finished product. This actual batch was made in 08. This is the last time I made syrup. You can kind of see what it looks like. Tasty stuff.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed the show, and we look forward to seeing you next week right here on Common Ground. If you have a segment idea for Common Ground pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org or call us at 218-333-3022. To view this episode or any Common Ground segment, visit us at lptv.org/Common Ground. Individual segments or copies of Common Ground, please call 218-333-3020. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org.